Epstein, it left some lingering mysteries. One of the biggest ones is whether he ever worked for a American or foreign intelligence agency. The former Labor Secretary, who was Miami U.S. Attorney Alex Costa, he allegedly said that he did work for an intelligence agency. So could you resolve whether or not he did? And also, could you say why there was a minute missing from the jailhouse tape on the night of the
Yeah, sure. If
Hey, Pam, could I just interrupt?
Sure.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep? I can't believe you're asking a question on Epstein at a time like this where we're having some of the greatest success and also tragedy with what happened in Texas. It just seems like a desecration, but you go ahead.
Desecration. That might be the word for it, folks. My name is David Griscom, and you're listening to Left Reckoning. I hope that you are good, safe, wherever you are. I appreciate y'all tuning in this week, just me. But we have some really special guests coming up in a little bit. We're going to be talking with none other than our good friend Branko Marcetic, writer at Jacobin, about everything that's been going on in this bizarre nation of ours. Really, really wonderful speaking with him. And then for the post game, patrons only, we're going to be joined by none other than our good friend and comrade, Mr. Ben Burgis. It's been a little while since we've had him on the program, so you're not going to want to miss any of that. Plenty of stories we're going to get to today, and this Epstein thing that we opened up with Trump, has been quite interesting to watch. As for people who don't know, basically the Trump administration is acting as if there wasn't really anything of substance regarding Jeffrey Epstein, and all of these kind of claims and hopes that that Trump was going to release the logs and the information about somebody like Epstein, who 100%, was an intelligence asset. Those have all been dashed, and you see there, it's kind of interesting. Trump, who usually has a very difficult time focusing on any topic, is very, very quick to try to change the subject to talk about Texas. We'll have plenty of time to get into Epstein in the near future, but obviously we needed to start with what's happened around me here in Central Texas. Over the weekend, we have seen just tremendous flooding, horrific flooding all across Central Texas, and the consequences have just been unimaginable. Rising water tore up people's homes and carried folks to their death. As of recording, 161 people are still missing. Over 100 people confirmed dead, 94 of them in Kerr County, Texas, where some of the worst of this flooding occurred. This is an extreme tragedy. And just to kind of paint this picture, we're not going to play any horror stories or anything like that. I just want people to understand the amount of water and how extreme the storm was. I'll play this real fast for y'all. And as you can see there, what looks like a river as large as the Mississippi, this is something that has swelled up in just a few days. You can see the trees there completely submerged. People were whisked away from their homes in the middle of the night. Most people did not even get the alerts. We'll get into that in a second, that there was flash flooding like this occurring. And as many people have seen in the coverage and know, this is an area where a lot of people frequent in the summer, particularly young folks and children who attend summer camp there. And, one of the camps directly affected is Camp Mystic, an all-girls camp, where unfortunately there have been significant deaths and casualties. It has been something that's been truly heartbreaking, I think, for everybody all across the globe. I've really appreciated people reaching out to me, but certainly for us here in Texas, because in a moment like this, you really want to know how this happened, was it avoidable, and who's responsible for these deaths here. Now, I'm going to go through a couple things that I think are important for all of us to note about just the kind of geography and the area here. This is a region, right, where flash flooding occurs, and it's one of those things that I guess I didn't realize how unique this area was compared to other folks. The rains here, obviously, it's Texas, it's hot. We don't get as much rain as we need, but we do suffer from extreme flash floods. Extreme. And I don't think that people outside of the state, outside of the region, understand how extreme and how quickly these things occur. I know when folks come to Austin and they experience one of these extreme rainstorms, they're kind of flabbergasted. They've never seen rain fall in the way that it does here. And that's Austin, right, where a lot of this flash flooding occurred. It's even worse, right? So the point here is that this is a region that suffers from this regularly, right? It's one of those things like the rain, you can't control that. But we do know that this is something that we are going to have to go through time and time again, which is why some of the response here and some of the systems here are so tragically underfunded and undersupported. There has been a lot of talk about the National Weather Service. Understandably, Elon Musk and Donald Trump's war on those systems have left a lot of people out of the job. So I believe something like 500 employees at the National Weather Service have left since Musk and Trump have started cutting, abusing, and harassing those employees. I think it's important, though, to get the facts straight about what happened here, because we need to understand why this happened so that we can get better results and protect people in the future. There was a really good article by Molly Taft in Wired. It says, meteorologists say the National Weather Service did its job in Texas. Now, this is quoting from the piece. I really just want people to understand that the forecast office in San Antonio did a fantastic job. They got the warning out, but this was an extreme event. The rainfall rates over the 6-hour period were higher than 1,000-year rainfall rates. That equates to there being less than a 0.1% chance of something like that happening in any given year. Some of the first changes made to the NOAA because of those cuts were weather balloon launches across the country being reduced or eliminated altogether. But the balloons that did deploy this week, including one sent up over Texas on Thursday, which showed a saturated atmosphere with slow-moving winds, giving a heads up on possible extreme rainfall, provided valuable information that helped inform the forecasts. Now, this is important here because not to say that there isn't something to be worried about, for example, about these cuts and these attacks on the National Weather Service, but rather to put this information in context for folks, right, that there were warnings here. And our systems in Texas and in Kerr County and across central Texas failed, right? And we can get into some of the reasons why in a second. Now, it was incredible that these people who are being overworked in difficult conditions because of these cuts, because of the abuse from the federal government that they're getting, it is to their credit that they were able to get these warnings, to get this information that they tried to disseminate to local authorities who failed, frankly. It is very worrying when you realize that these cuts are only going to get worse in the near future. So it's important that we have these folks who are able to do this kind of work in the first place. This is something that is under threat by Trump and by Musk in their war against America and the American people. Now, another thing that is important to note here is that, yeah, certainly climate change plays a role. Our weather is getting more unpredictable and more extreme. But what we saw here is something that, again, is part of, it's an extreme weather event, it's a rare weather event, all of that, yes. But this is in an area called Flash Flood Alley, right? This is an area that is known historically, all the way back to the 1800s, that this is an area that suffers from extreme flash floods, which means that this is an area that should have the infrastructure investment and protocols in place to make sure that a tragedy doesn't happen like this, right? Because the fact of the matter is that because of suicidal ideology of austerity that dominates in the state and its politics, there was a refusal to set up the systems that would be necessary to protect these young children and all these folks who suffered. Now let's get to the first failure here. The first failure that we saw in Texas was the failure of getting this information out to folks. Now again, if you live here, you're almost oversaturated with emergency alerts. In fact, every time a police officer, sees somebody that they don't like, we get these kind of statewide alerts sent out. So most people turn them off of their phone. They don't pay much attention to them. That's already a problem in and of itself. The fact of the matter here is that a lot of folks didn't even get these emergency alerts. This is from Texas Public Radio. Kerr County residents say emergency alert messages sporadic, inconsistent in wake of floods. In his first press conference after the deadly floods last week, Kerr County Judge Rob Kelly said unequivocally that the area did not have an emergency alert system. Quote, "We have no warning system," he said on the morning of July 4th, just hours after the Guadalupe River topped its banks. When pushed about why evacuations did not occur earlier, Kelly doubled down. "We didn't know this was coming. Rest assured, no one knew this kind of flood was coming." When asked Tuesday at what time warnings were issued, Kerr County Sheriff Larry Lethia said he was focused on search and rescue. "It's not that easy," quote, he says, "and you just push a button, okay? There's a lot more to that, and we've told you several times. Did it happen? I can't tell you at this time." But Texas Newsroom has learned that not only does the county have a mass alert system for public emergencies, first responders asked for it to be triggered early Friday morning. The Guadalupe River rose as much as 26 feet in 45 minutes around 4 a.m., said Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, according to emergency radio transmissions. The Texas Newsroom reviewed volunteer firefighters asked for what's called a code red alert to be sent as early as 4:22 a.m. Dispatchers delayed, saying they needed special authorizations. Now, some of these people got those messages immediately. Others didn't receive any message until later in the day, which is, if anyone was following the storm knows, at that point, a lot of the people who got kind of pulled away from their homes in the middle of the night, they were already trying to, find safety and shelter. They had already gone through this massive wall of water that caused so much damage, right? So, you have this information coming out from the National Weather Service, and there was a failure to disseminate that across the region. Now, look, it's very clear, and I don't want to sit here and start attacking all of these first responders, right? Because it's very clear that this was a known problem in the region and across the state for a long time. That there needed to be more investment into the emergency protocols of the state. In fact, there's a great story that people can read in the Houston Chronicle by Nina Stija and Kerry Blankinger called "Kerr County Asked Texas to Help Pay for a Flood Warning System for 8 Years. Can it happen now?" I highly suggest people go through this and read it because it goes through a story of people saying, we need support from the state in order to be able to build out the system that is necessary to make sure that people do not get caught up in a flash flood, that people have the ability to be alerted so that we can prevent unnecessary deaths, right? And these things were cut because of budget reasons. And we'll get into the state government in a second. But I really want people to note this, that it is absolutely absurd that in a region that is known as Flash Flood Alley, that these systems were not put up in place initially, right? So I say all this to try to orient us, right, to what the actual problems are, right? Because a lot of the conversations that have been going on around it about Musk and Doge and other things are very important for us to keep on highlighting and talking about. But it kind of lets this fundamental problem that we're facing in Kerr County and all across the United States, which is the underfunding, right, and the lack of care and oversight over our kind of antiquated systems, be they infrastructure, be they emergency alert systems, right, be they funding for first responders, right? These are things that need serious help and care and oversight. And all across this country, you were seeing a failure of the state to be able to be responsible for these systems that they are responsible for, right? And that comes from a political lethargy, right? for years and years and years, you have two parties, the Democratic and the Republican Party, that are unable to meet the moment, to meet the threats that most of us face, and instead are playing this very cynical and sinister game with one another. Where, and we'll get into this in just a moment, where politics has just become a kind of a blood sport where you try to hurt the other side and the other side tries to hurt you. This is the consequence, right? And this is the consequence. We have over 100 people who are dead right now, and it did not need to be this way. It did not need to be this way. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit before we finish up about some of the political failures here. Because as I noted before, Kerr County, could their politics be better? I'm not an expert, right? I have a feeling that, like most things, we need to have state support, and by that I mean like the state of Texas. Something that we haven't had on these kind of issues. Some real leadership from people who, are governing a state of, 30 million plus people, right? One of the largest economies in the world. Well, it turns out that as recently as the most recent legislative session, right, where, remember, we did a bunch of very important things for Texans, like putting the 10 Commandments in school, or privatizing our school system, or giving $300 million to Hollywood millionaires, right? That's literally something that they did. $300 million a year, by the way, $1.5 billion over the next few years in incentives that we are giving to Hollywood to come and make movies in Texas, right? That's going on when this happens. Texas lawmakers failed to pass a bill to improve local disaster warning systems this year. A GOP state lawmaker who represents Kerr County says he likely would vote differently now on House Bill 13. Well, I hope so, friend. For the last 3 days, Rep. Verdel has been out with first responders in Kerr County as they search for victims from the devastating flood that swept through central Texas early Friday morning. Quote, I can tell you in hindsight, watching what it takes to deal with a disaster like this, my vote would probably be different now, said Verdel, a freshman GOP lawmaker from Brady. The measure, House Bill 13, would have created a new government council to establish the emergency response plan and administer the grant program, both of which would have been aimed at facilitating better communication between first responders. The bill has also called for a plan to include the use of outdoor warning sirens like those in tornado-prone Texas counties and develop new emergency alert systems. Now, again, sorry if I didn't know this before. For people who are outside the state might not have been following the story really closely, there are no siren systems here, which is very, very damaging and dangerous in this area. One, because, as we've noted before, this is a flood-prone part of the state, a flood-prone part of the country. And two, this is an area where you have a lot of people coming in and out of, right? Because it's a very popular camping tourist area. It's the hill country, and if people don't know what that means, it means you don't really get the best cell service across Central Texas, right? So there are people who don't have access, who aren't going to be getting those kind of text messages in the first place. So yeah, you do need a siren system. Sorry, it's absurd that it doesn't exist. On top of this, as we're learning, many of these children and these camps for kids, they have no cell phone rules, right? To encourage people, obviously, to enjoy nature and be present. But that also means that those people are not getting communication, right? And that's assuming that those communications are going out. As we've already noted, they weren't sent out in a timely fashion, despite the fact that the National Weather Service had issued these warnings before the flooding got to its worst. So you have all that going on. And then in the state government here in Texas, we're literally giving millions of dollars away to millionaires so that they can make movies here, right? Or privatizing our school system so people can make money, taking money out of our public system to go to private schools. Cutting property taxes for homeowners, right? All this kind of stuff. But there's no money to make sure that people aren't dying in floods. In fact, it goes so far, this suicidal ideology, that this is what this disgusting little twerp, Briscoe Kane, right? So you can look at this timestamp, July 5th, 3:21. So this is a moment where people are literally swimming through the water, trying to find and recover the bodies of children, little kids who died deaths that are preventable. Preventable. And this is the kind of person who is representing us in the state legislature saying, quote, we must not allow this great tragedy to be used to grow government. Literally a suicidal ideology. If you're sitting here and saying, hey, you know what? I want to make sure I'm willing to let children die, preventable deaths, right? All this kind of devastation and destruction because I'm worried about spending some of the vast wealth that is generated in this state. That is a suicidal death ideology. It is absolutely disgusting. That is a representative. That is a representative right there who could not care less, about the deaths of children. I mean, truly something else. They do make them special. I'll end on this because this is a tragedy that happened in the South, and everybody knows what that means. When something like this happens, there's a whole host of people who, I don't know, feel a little gleeful about it, feel like some people are getting their just desserts for the way that they vote. One of these figures, and you know what? Everybody knows this. Everybody sees this. This is just the one that broke me when I was reading about the deaths of these two girls we'll get into in a second. When you see these freaks and their disgusting ideology, right, where they want people to be punished for making the wrong choice, right? I don't even want to play their game of trying to, explain things like, well, Texas doesn't vote 100% Republican, right? How are you going to decide which people voted correctly that you should grieve or worry about, right? I'm not even going to play their game because it is the antithesis of being a human being. A human being, when they see folks suffering, right, they shouldn't put it through some disgusting, distorted political lens, right? Like Briscoe Kane, who's saying, hey, let's make sure that we don't do anything to save those kids. Don't spend no money to save those kids. Or somebody like this saying, oh, looks like these folks deserve it because they didn't vote for the lady that I want them to vote for in the last presidential election. I mean, truly an anti-human sentiment there. And I said a lot of American politics has just become a sadistic game of deciding which group of people you want to see suffer. It is soul-killing stuff. And that is the fact. It is soul-killing stuff. Because the idea, right, that we understand, for example, that like collective punishment is wrong, right? When Israel says, oh, you know what, we're going to kill all the children in Gaza because of Hamas, right? We understand that that's anti-human, disgusting, despicable. And we also understand that the idea of collective punishment, right, is something that is not only immoral, it goes against basic human decency. But for some reason, liberals in this country, whenever something horrible happens in the South, right, despite the fact, that the South is, where you have some of the most disenfranchised people, right, some of the most diverse regions of the country, they say, you know what, it's good that these folks suffer so that they can learn a fucking lesson, right? And I don't think there's any value in trying to flip the tables on them and saying next time something happens up wherever they live that, oh, maybe y'all deserve it because of this or that. I think fundamentally that if you are serious about building a better future, and this person's not, and any of these freaks and cretins who say this kind of stuff, who are gleeful when children are dying, right? They're not interested in a better world. They just want to feel right about things, right? And it's a very, very distancing thing, right? This is like something that happens when you don't really see other people as human beings, right? It is a part of an unfortunate American dilemma. I think that most people have kind of like disassociated from reality. And that's the only way that I can, try to understand something like this. You have to be completely dissociated from reality to say, well, yeah, you know what? Serves these children right for them to be suffering. I mean, there's two girls, they were found with their arms clasped together, right? Dead. Yeah, they deserve it, apparently, according to these freaks. Would it matter to them if they found out that these two little girls were from Dallas, right? Well, Dallas actually voted for Kamala Harris. Oh, she won Dallas County. So we can worry about these children now. Glory be to God. I mean, think about that for a second and how soul-killing and disgusting that is, right? And you see it on the other side as well. It's not just liberals. I mean, you're seeing these slobs showing up in front of the alligator Alcatraz prison, this monstrous facility that they're building in Florida, and taking photographs gleefully about it. I mean, it is a sick and sinister evil which is propagating itself in this country, right? And we have to do everything that we can to fight against it. Because what you should do, right, in any place, but especially in a place like this where you have elected representatives like Briscoe Cain, who are saying we must not allow this tragedy to be used to grow government, right? Literal monsters, folks who you should be angry at, right, and taking your rage out on politically. You should be directing all of the frustration and the horror and the pain that people are experiencing right now on the failures of our Republican government. You have Donald Trump, who along with Elon Musk is waging war against the very same people who are fighting to prevent these kind of tragedies, folks at the National Weather Service, and across the board, right? These cuts to social programs, right? These cuts to doctors, to healthcare workers, all this stuff that's going on from the leadership of the Republican Party is deeply anti-human. You can draw a great connection there. You can draw a connection to somebody like Greg Abbott. I mean, hell, Greg Abbott is great if you are a government official who doesn't want to be held accountable for nothing. Because the one thing that they don't do in Texas is hold people accountable for bullshit. They don't hold people accountable for nothing. Look at Uvalde, years and years and years of rhetoric from them, nothing. Just harassment of the parents who were unable to be able to identify their children because they were so shot up and destroyed by that monster. You know, we have no accountability for the people who are responsible for that social death that we saw in Uvalde and this, right? There's plenty of ability that we have to see a tragedy like this and to be able to make a political point that we deserve better as Texans, as Americans, as human beings than what we get. Right? That's why I believe in the politics that I believe in, because my politics, I'll just put it like this. My politics are, the kind of folks who see something like this happening and they show up and fight and try to rescue folks. Be it, the first responders who were saving all of those children. I mean, truly heroic human stuff, or that father who people heard the story of who, punched the windows out of their house to make sure that his family could get out and died. That is a very human thing, right? And that is the kind of human nature, basic part of who we are as people that I believe in, and I want to see us build out from that, right? And to build a society of care and of love and common understanding. And that means doing things like spending money to make sure that everybody can have access to healthcare, or that we can have a siren system in flash flood fucking alley, right? That's the human politics that we have. That should be your reaction, is how can we take this human emotion and pain and care and want for better for people and build a society that actually upholds those very, very basic human emotions that we have around this. And all of this negativity and evil and inhumanity that you get from people who are saying things like, oh, these folks deserved it. Or somebody like Briscoe Cain who's saying, we must not let this tragedy touch our hearts, right? All that kind of evil stuff, we just push away with the truth and the righteousness and the humanity of our kind of politics. And that will be my last plug on this. Because time and time again, you see these horrific things going on. And you see this very, very nasty desire from certain folks to see folks punished who they think are deserving. It's an anti-human, soul-killing energy, and it needs to be confronted and destroyed wherever it exists. Well, there's no way to transition. So just give me 1 second and we'll go over to our good friend, Branko Marcetic. Branko is an incredible writer at Jacobin. He's somebody whose work I very much respect, and I'm very lucky to be able to have somebody like that on our program. I will go and chat with him, and we'll be back. We're going to have Ben Burgis in the postgame. Let's give me a second, and we'll get over to this Branko conversation. Welcome back, Left Reckoners. It's been a pretty eventful past few weeks, and I got a lot of questions and a lot of confusion, so I couldn't think of anyone better to bring on to help me sort of work through these big questions that I'm having about American politics in the world than our good friend Branko Marcetic, who is a writer at Jacobin magazine. He's one of those folks who, when you see his byline, you better click, read, and share. Branko, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm honored to know that when the world is completely falling apart, that I'm the person to call.
Yes, exactly.
Have this depressing conversation.
Well, I need somebody to get me through this because I'm trying to, I try to walk a line. I care a lot, obviously, about what's happening in this country and what's happening in the world, but I also try not to be an alarmist because one of the things that I think we learned, particularly in Trump 1, was that it wasn't good to sort of have everybody in this kind of panicky state all the time because you don't think well, you don't strategize well, you don't react well to the kind of problems. And that's part of the Trump strategy is like doing 10 different horrible things at once so that you're having a hard time keeping your eye on the ball. I wanted to start before we get into the stuff that's happening in Washington, talk about one of the things that we're all very hopeful about, which is the Zohran Mamdani win in New York. There have been these threats from Trump, and we had the co-chair of DSA on last week to talk about them. But I wanted to hear your thoughts on how seriously we should take these threats from Trump to potentially try to denaturalize, or kick out somebody like Zohran from the U.S.
I suspect that they wouldn't actually do that against Mamdani. I mean, even when Trump was asked about it, he kind of demurred. He said, well, we'll look at it. But the Trump administration so far, Trump 2.0, has been far more radical and authoritarian than the first one. But I think they've also, at the same time as they have suffered for it in terms of public opinion, they've also been somewhat careful to not go too far past a line and certainly not to completely kind of throw the country into a constitutional crisis, because I think they're aware that could really destroy them politically. They've pushed at the edges of what could be considered acceptable without trying to go too far. We saw that with the LA military deployment, which initially was this very scary thing. And to be clear, it still is a very alarming thing. It's setting this precedent that will be, I think, used by either him or a future president to go much further than he has. But the military so far has not it hasn't been the kind of, what you might imagine in North Korea or Russia or something, where you're seeing the military pointing guns at people. In fact, really, it's the LAPD that's been the most kind of violent force over there. And I think similar with this, I think it's something that they want to threaten. I think it's something that they want people to hear and be afraid of with the Mamdani denaturalization threat. Would they go after someone who is such a prominent political figure for such obviously politically motivated reasons? I don't think so.
I mean, I would want
to be proven wrong.
I haven't seen any polling on it, but I have a feeling that Mamdani might be more popular than Trump right now. It might not be the public facing fight that you want to engage in.
No, definitely not. And it would also create, I think, a national firestorm that would really refocus attention on the fact that the public voted for what they thought was a mass removal of criminals, violent criminals particularly. And then if the poster child of Trump's kind of immigration crackdown becomes a Democrat who's said to be the mayor of New York, then it becomes, they really are just using this as a political tool to crush dissent, which they are doing. But I think maybe that hasn't quite reached mass consciousness as much as maybe people like us and people who are listening to the show realize. But I think, just to be clear, even if they don't go after Mamdani, they definitely do want to do this with lower profile people. So we know for a fact that this is going to be then the next stage in this immigration crackdown by Trump. They're going to go after other naturalized citizens and find ways that they can use to justify to strip them of citizenship and possibly deport them.
And I mean, I just think it has to be noted too, when you're talking about utilizing immigration for political reasons, the fact of the matter is that a lot of Democrats in this country were very comfortable with somebody named Mahmoud Khalil being, held by ICE in unbearable conditions, for the crime of speaking up about the genocide in Gaza, right? So, this has kind of been introduced to our politics by leading figures of both major political parties.
Yeah, it's actually stunning how quickly this shift has happened. I mean, I wouldn't say it's quite been normalized yet, but it has just become this regular thing. not just kind of this idea that the green card holders basically have no more rights than someone who's here on a visa. But even just the threat of deportation, I'm sorry,
No worries.
my earphone just fell out. Even just the threat of deportation, which has become now just this explicitly kind of political tool of intimidation. There's not really any bones made about it. I mean, when Musk fell out with Trump, the first thing that the MAGA was saying was, oh, deport him. Of course, when Mamdani won, it was, we need to denationalize and deport him. You've had people like Mehdi Hassan. I mean, Mehdi Hassan has had things like this yelled at him for a while from the right, but this year, people were again saying, it's time to denaturalize and deport him. Deportation is not meant to be a punishment. Deportation is like the end stage of an immigration process. And it's like, okay, well, you don't have the right to stay here, or maybe, you misled us about your application form for a visa or whatever. Okay, well, and you won't leave voluntarily, then we have to throw you out. That's how deportation works in every country in the world, practically, including the United States. And now it's become this kind of gleeful form of punishment that the right just kind of threatens its political opponents with. That is a real shift and quite an alarming one.
Well, not to be all fireworks and apple pie, but like it is kind of crazy, in the United States, which kind of has like this image of itself as like the place that people from other countries, for example, who aren't able to speak out against their government, come so that they can, enjoy, the freedoms of being of being a human being. And to see the way that folks, talk about, the Khalil case in particular, it's like, well, if you come into my house and you say something that offends me, I'm kicking you out. It's like, well, that's like a very un-American, frankly, position to take. But like there has been, I think, this kind of like, I don't know, civic religion, like degradation in this country, where a lot of people, I don't find, even like on the left and certainly on the right, like they see politics in a kind of cynical way. And I get why they do, because it doesn't feel like those kind of ideals are like really practically like enforced and upheld in society. But it has been kind of shocking to me to see how quickly, folks, on the deportation stuff, but even on things like, I get worried about people's rights to, for example, like have a trial by jury, right? Or have like legal counsel, all these kind of things. I mean, you've seen this with these deportations in the Persian camp, in El Salvador. I mean, it has been kind of shocking how quickly these kind of, I don't know, fundamental cornerstone rights of our legal system and our political system have been sort of evaporated.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the immigration stuff is the kind of ground zero for it. And the way it's done is, it's not being done in the way that, I don't know, if you think of a despotic regime like Saudi Arabia or something, it's not done in a way where they've just abolished the right to due process. It's in this way where they kind of sneakily try to get around due process. The best example of this was the Venezuelan men that they banished to the torture prison in El Salvador, where what they did was they just packed them into a detention camp and then onto a plane as soon as they could, before the courts basically had the chance to put their pants on. And then once they were in the air, they said, oh, well, you have no more jurisdiction. They're in international waters now. And once they landed in El Salvador, their kind of excuse has been, we can't do anything here. We have no power to get these people back. They're out of our hands now. And it's obviously very cynical and sneaky, but yeah, it's been horrifying and interesting to watch how they have gone about this, trying to kind of stay within the legal boundaries, or at least claim to be, and without kind of offending ordinary Americans' belief in basic civil liberties, while brazenly kind of trampling those civil liberties.
Well, I mean, we're going to talk in a little bit about a lot of things that we thought would never be touched, or at least to this extent, that have been kind of trampled on by this administration. But before we go there, we got to take, at least for our own soul's sake, taking a little bit of good news, which has been this constant freak out and thinking from the smartest people in America about why Zohran won. I have this from Morning Joe that I think you'll like a lot. So, Branko, I got to ask you that, why is it that the most popular politicians are all these far left lunatics instead of these really inspiring moderate Democrats?
I love that question. Why is it that you guys who promise absolutely nothing, and in fact repeatedly say it's impossible to make anything better, and you won't even try, why is it that you are less popular than the people who are saying, hey, let's make it so that people don't have to pay higher rent next year, or let's make buses free? Why is it? You know, this is part of this whole phenomenon. This has been going on for 10 years, ever since Sanders ran his campaign for president. Clinton lost, where the kind of the corporate Democratic establishment keeps trying to find this sort of cheat code for how it can be popular again without actually changing anything about its politics or any of the things that it stands for. And they keep thinking, if we can only just somehow copy the appeal of people like Sanders and Mamdani and AOC and others, but without actually adopting any of the things that they ran on that were wildly popular. Like how do we copy this appeal that they have and speak to people's kind of concerns without really offering them anything? I mean, it hasn't worked for 10 years. They keep trying this and it just keeps falling flat. They keep finding kind of charismatic figures or figures who they believe will be compelling to the public, people like Kamala Harris. But it turns out without the actual politics and the policies to back it up, this stuff doesn't end up being popular because people realize that this person is not actually going to do anything.
Yeah, and I mean, I do love when somebody like Zohran does well, when the kind of fixation is like, oh, well, he did really great social media stuff. And it's like, to be fair, the Democrats could probably get a little bit better at doing that. But no, it was because he was saying things like, hey, we're going to get free buses for you. We're going to freeze the rent. Oh, those are all things that anyone in New York, let alone probably the rest of the country, understands. Like, hey, that sounds like a pretty nice damn thing. Yeah. I do wonder, though, Branko, just thinking about folks, they do sometimes try to, catch these lightning rods. I think a figure that they're trying to do that with to a certain extent is Jasmine Crockett, who I think a lot of people have sort of view her as maybe very progressive. She's not particularly progressive. She's willing to kind of fight in a way that a lot of Democrats aren't and, to spar with folks. But I think that she would also be somebody, if she gets elevated, like some folks are hoping that she will, would also be somebody who would end up being very disappointing to folks because, it's nice to see Marjorie Taylor Greene get yelled at by somebody. But also you want to have somebody who's actually delivering, for you, and if anything, not opposing kind of progressive, popular policies.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, I went to the Bernie Sanders start of the year, and I talked to a bunch of people there, and, I asked them about how they thought the Democratic Party was doing in the age of Trump 2.0. Spoiler, they did not think they were doing very well. But I asked them, if they thought any Democrats or any particular political figures were kind of doing the kind of thing that they want to see. And people did name Jasmine Crockett. And I think there is such a because the Democratic Party response to Trump winning was initially so meek and kind of just to lie down and surrender. There's such a premium right now in Democratic politics on who is willing to fight and who is willing to kind of stand up to basically what people see as the bullies in the Trump administration. And so it's possible for a politician, if they kind of perform, I guess, radicalism the way that she has, certainly perform kind of a conflict and standing up to the administration, that they can catch fire. I mean, I think you saw that with Gavin Newsom, who has helped to rehabilitate his image a little bit within the Democratic Party, raise his profile within it, not by actually doing anything progressive as governor, even though in California you easily could, but by, once Trump kind of attacked him and sent the National Guard into LA and threatened to arrest Newsom was out there in CNN acting like the tough guy and saying, well, if he wants to arrest me, he should arrest me, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think that probably is the kind of the best vehicle if you want to not run on anything and not actually have any sort of transformational agenda. That's probably the best vehicle that corporate Democrats have right now to kind of challenge the left.
Well, look, I mean, it might work just given how kind of weak and, in your words, meek, the Democratic opposition to Trump has been. I want to play this clip here of Schumer's pushback against the big, beautiful bill. But I wanted to note something up on the top and jump in, if you have anything to add here. But, this is one of the most damaging pieces of legislation, probably, that has been passed in my lifetime. I mean, the human cost is just going to be immense. And it has been wild to see how casual, frankly, the Democratic Party has been in their opposition to this. I mean, there has been more opposition to Mamdani from a lot of people in that party than to this bill that will undo decades and decades of achievements of the labor movement, and the the once more pro worker Democratic Party, you're seeing all that kind of, evaporating. And this is the kind of opposition that you get. This is Chuck Schumer standing up, for the American people by changing the name of the bill. Good job, Chuck. Now, I just want to note, I want to hear your thoughts here, Branko, but I just want to note something very important for folks who might not be familiar with like Democratic Party comms. All of the footage of this, right, was put out by Chuck Schumer's office, which again meant that, and who knows, maybe the people around him knew better. But Chuck's the boss, they got to do what he says. But they thought that this was like a real winner, and they produced many hype videos around it. And obviously, everybody kind of reacted with, "What the hell are you doing here? I mean, this is a serious thing, and you're changing the name. Who gives a shit?" But I'm curious if you have anything to add there.
Until you showed me that clip, I had not realized that they had packaged that into a video. So when they came up with the leader Schumer, I mean, it was almost like a. I mean, if you did a parody of Chuck Schumer and how useless he's been, that is what you would do. But they are,
and also like in such like a kind of like know-it-all point too. It's like, oh, the 1974 budget rule says you can't can't use like a comma in your name, or
right? Yeah, I mean, that kind of says it all. I mean, stuff like that, why he has a dismal approval rating with the Democratic base, which, by the way, is, to me, one of the big shifts in the dynamic of this Trump term versus the first one. There was obviously Democrats, rank-and-file Democrats, ordinary voters were very, very activated by the original Trump administration in the same way that they are now. But what you also had is people had a huge amount of faith in the Democratic Party and the Democratic establishment. People like Schumer had very, very, very high approval ratings, not just in New York, but nationally. And that was basically true for most prominent Democrats. And I think that's, interestingly, when you look back on both the attempts to kind of the left insurgent attempts to take over the Democratic Party in 2018 to 2020, and also Bernie Sanders' run, which ended up unfortunately kind of hitting a wall in South Carolina and never winning again against Joe Biden. I think that is a big part of it. The Democratic base was fundamentally quite satisfied with the party and what they were doing and thought they were doing a great job. That is not the case anymore. You have a Trump administration that is far more, like I said, far more radical, far more kind of menacing than the first one was, and doing things that people would not have even dreamed even two years ago, 6 months ago. But people are no longer satisfied with the Democratic response, and it seems like they really hate the Democratic establishment, not just voters as well, but even just kind of, I don't know, Democratic liberal influencers who host podcasts and news shows and stuff. So that is an interesting dynamic, and I think that's a big part of it. But the last thing I'll say, part of me sometimes feels almost bad for Schumer, because there's not really much that he can do in terms of kind of, in a very high profile way, kind of gumming up the works for this bill. But I think the Democratic failure is kind of all the years leading up to this, more so than even what they've done over the last 6 months. But, when he puts out stuff like that as a kind of attempt to show, hey, look, I am resisting, it really does not help his case, because it just makes him and the rest of the Democratic leadership look so much more out of touch and inept.
And I just want to add really quick, as people know, we're talking about millions of people being pushed off of Medicaid. This is going to drop an economic bomb across rural America, not just in the sense of like hospitals closing, but like a lot of the economies of these areas is reliant on that kind of federal money that's coming in there. So we're going to see a lot of pain and suffering, in addition to, all those kind of more high profile things that folks know. It's like, I mean, this is just like the most insane grab bag for the rich. It gives a permanent tax deduction on private jets. It bans Medicare from being able to negotiate with Big Pharma, which has been a demand of progressives for a very, very long time. I mean, this is an extremely devastating bill. And I hear what you're saying about procedurally, like the weakness of the Democrats to actually have something to do against this. But most Americans don't even realize that this bill is doing anything to cut Medicaid, right? There is a lot of confusion. And I just want to add this, that the Democrats, in my opinion, seem to be operating under the playbook of this is going to harm a lot of folks. So they're going to kind of revolt against the Republican Party later, what I find to be a very, very dangerous and damaging strategy, because it means that you are willing to sacrifice all of these people for the electoral success of a party, which, by the way, has shown in my lifetime that it's not really willing to do very much when it does have the reins of power. But I think that's the kind of strategy here. But again, on the critique of that, then if that is your strategy, to sort of say, hey, look how bad it has been under them. Why aren't you making a bigger fucking deal about this? How is it that so many people don't know in this country what is actually in this bill?
Yeah, I mean, I saw a study recently that looked at the media mentions and looked at polling around the bill, and people said that they mostly had heard about the no tax and tips thing, which is a pretty devastating indictment on, well, both I think Democrats as the opposition party, but then also the media.
Mm-hmm.
How is it? I mean, to some extent, I was shocked because it shows you the difference in my media consumption compared to what the average person consumes. For me, all I have heard about is the fact that this is a cartoonishly plutocratic bill that effectively robs the poorest Americans to give a wealth of handouts to the richest people in the country. But that clearly is not what has broken through to people. And that is just a systematic institutional failure on every possible level. And I agree. I think an indictment on the Democrats for not somehow making this kind of the central critique of the bill. It's incredibly grim stuff. And the idea that they can just kind of run in opposition or kind of ride the wave of unhappiness about it. I mean,
but they don't realize that they're unpopular too. Sorry, but they don't realize that they're not popular either.
Yeah. I mean, the Democrats are historically unpopular, not just with their own base, but also with independents and Republicans. I mean, there was a focus group, I remember a few months ago when Trump had come in and his approval rate started to dip. And because people were unhappy with the economy, that's another big difference from the first Trump term. Trump no longer has a strong approval rating on the economy, which you would think would make him vulnerable. And in this focus group, they asked people, how do you feel about Trump? We don't like what he's doing. Okay, who would you vote for in 2028? And it was not we would vote for the Democrats, because the Democratic brand is so damaged by years and decades of this kind of corporate politics that people, just because they don't like what Trump is doing, does not necessarily mean that they will automatically gravitate towards them. And that should be a wake-up call for anyone who thinks that the Trump kind of spreading misery, like he's tossing flowers down a wedding runway, is going to be just easy to beat, and Republicans will inherently lose. Maybe, but maybe not. It could easily happen that doesn't go that way, and then what happens? When you have another 4 years of Republican control.
Well, in the last few minutes, I wanted to ask you this, because this has been something that's been on my mind. We don't have time to really get into the ins and outs of the bombing of Iran by the United States. But, it was something that was obviously notable because of the human cost and loss, but also because of what it kind of showed about, Trump too, and who kind of have influence and power. And, this bill, for all the talk of this being the party of the working class, I mean, Holly goes along with it. You have J.D. Vance, casting the tie-breaking vote, all this kind of dream that some of the folks, for example, maybe at Compact Magazine may have had about this reorientation around the Republican Party on working class issues has kind of dissipated and evaporated. So my question to you, is do you see this as a certain faction within the Trump administration kind of having won out and sort of putting this back on typical Republican autopilot politics, or was it all just hot air from the get-go with the Vance and this whole reorientation of Trumpism and the MAGA movement?
I think there are people in the MAGA movement and inside even the Trump administration who are genuinely anti-interventionists. Some of them have actually been purged, although also in the weeks leading up to Iran, to the Iran bombing, there was also a mini purge of some more hawkish figures, which had initially given me, maybe naively, a little bit of optimism. I'd hoped, okay, well, some of the pro-war voices have been taken out. Some of the more pro-restraint voices have ascended. Maybe that will prevent something terrible from happening. The thing that I did not calculate is the fact that the person who is running all this at the end of the day is Donald Trump. And while he may have people around him who counsel restraint and who want to get people into positions near him who have more anti-war views, at the end of the day, the Trump movement and the Republican Party is whatever Trump decides it is and whatever he decides to do. And Trump is a notoriously indecisive, hypocritical, flip-flopping, and a liar who will say anything to get elected and will say anything in a political moment when it benefits him, and unfortunately can be easily swayed with the right person whispering in his ear, or who knows, perhaps just waking up on the wrong side of the bed, or what have you. But that, I think, is the problem. Is that at the end of the day, Trump, despite the fact that he takes all these very extreme authoritarian measures for a U.S. president, is not a strong leader. We know that he tends to be, he meets Xi Jinping and he immediately falls in love with the guy despite spending months and years railing against him. He's a guy who is swayed by pressure, and who it turns out at the end of the day, similar to Biden, he did not really have the strength, the mettle to resist concerted pressure from not just hawks within his own administration, but also Israel and Netanyahu. Mm-hmm. And he kind of just went along with this when he thought that it was going to be a political winner, and then just as quickly changed his mind again. He did the bombing, and then he realized, this could be a real problem, and then he got out of it quickly. Does not mean that we're out of the woods. The Iran issue could still go somewhere pretty bad. It's still a live issue, but I think that's kind of ultimately the problem. It's Trump himself.
Yeah, I think that's right. Well, Branko, it is always a pleasure to speak with you. We'll have links, obviously, to your work and how folks can follow you. Is there anything in the short term that people should keep their eye on? Any big pieces or things or anything that you're keeping your eye on that folks should maybe watch as well?
I think subscribe to Jacobin, Jacobin magazine. Read Jacobin magazine. Read my pieces. Read everyone else's pieces. Nothing, unfortunately, nothing too exciting in the short term. But I think if you want to see my thoughts about what's happening, check out Jacobin.
Well, folks should absolutely do that. I always enjoy reading a fresh Branko piece whenever I see it come across my feed. Branko, thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Always great having our good buddy Branko on the program, talking about great things. I mean, hell, we got a real Jacobin program tonight. Folks didn't see, I actually have a piece. Maybe Matt will interview me about it. I feel a little weird going through it by myself, but I have a piece in Jacobin that just came out last week. If you haven't read it yet, you definitely should. It's called Populism Was Born from a Rural-Urban Alliance. In the 1880s, Texas farmers and factory workers discovered that they had the same enemy, corporate capitalists. Their alliance birthed American populism and offers lessons for today's working class divided by false urban-rural antagonisms. Had a lot of fun writing that, and thanks always to Jacobin and Megan Day for editing it. But anyways, Jacobin jam-packed episode, because not only do we have Branko, we also have our good buddy, who I think is wrestling an animal right now. Our good buddy, Mr. Ben Burgis. Ben, how are you doing?
I am good, man. Yeah, I can just sit here and write or do whatever on the computer for like 2 hours straight, and it's not an issue. And the second I do something like this, the cat comes and gets right straight in the middle of the camera.
It's a very classic thing. Well, Ben, everybody should know Ben. Ben is a writer at Jacobin, also the host of Give Them an Argument, amongst many other things. Ben, it is always, and also, of course, forever TMBS crew. It really is always great having you on the program, my friend. And, it's been too long, actually. I was just thinking about.
Yeah, no, it's been a minute.
Well, just giving everyone a little run of show. We're going to be jumping into the post game in just a second, where Ben and I are going to talk a little bit about all this red baiting against Zohran Mamdani. We also have some really good, I'm talking a nice, beautiful Patrick Bet David meltdown over Zohran. We've been really enjoying all of these meltdowns going on over in the post game. You get access to all of that at patreon.com/leftreckoning. For folks, we're doing it a little bit differently, though. We're going to jump right over once we finish this show. So if you are a patron, go on Patreon. You can get the link to the post game. You'll be able to watch this feed right now with no ads, all of that. So start jumping over. We do have one segment to do on the main feed, if that's all right with you, Ben. I wanted to introduce you to somebody and introduce the audience to somebody who I think is going to be an interesting fella. There's a man named James Talarico. Some people may have heard of him. Some people may have not. You may have seen his videos go viral on TikTok and social media over the past few months. He's really, really been pushing those out, and people have been fairly receptive to them. I'm talking about him because last week we talked about Colin Allred. Colin Allred is running again for Senate, Ben. I don't know if you saw that, but
God damn it! Like politics aside, the future of that Senate seat aside, Colin Allred's politics aside, like it just depresses me because even though I do not and never have lived in Texas, I got at a conservative estimate like 100,000 fundraising text messages about Colin Allred last time.
Well, that's why they love him. He raised a bunch of money. He raised a shitload of money, actually, for the Democratic Party. So, anyways, he's running. There's been a lot of talk about who's going to run. Beto might jump back in there. There might be a slate again. But this guy, James Talarico, he hasn't officially announced yet. But it did just come out. He's a state rep, for people who don't know. Talarico is a state rep here in Texas. He's gotten very popular. We'll play a video of his for these kind of social media hits that he's been doing, where he kind of talks in a biblical fashion. He's a seminary master student here, so sort of trying to reclaim, religion and Christianity from the Republicans and the right. I think that speaks to a lot of folks. But how I know he's 100% running is, one, I have been told through the grapevine by pretty much anyone who's involved in progressive politics that his people have been working the phones and are trying to get him to be kind of seen as the progressive in this Senate race. Senate or governor, from what I've gathered, they're considering both. But he's really wanting to run. And number two, that he is on Joe Rogan. So he recorded an episode with Joe Rogan, which, hey, for a Democrat, it's pretty good. Not many of them, other than not many of them do that anymore. But once I saw that, it's like, okay, well, 100% he's running. So I just wanted to introduce him to the audience, since we did talk a little bit about Colin Allred last week, and share some thoughts. But maybe I'll just play a short bit of this clip here that went mega viral. This is from the most recent ledge session where they put the 10 Commandments in school. And he schooled, one of these Republicans who put the bill forward.
What is the fourth commandment?
Just look it up.
No, it's pretty good, right? But also, I would just also note, just for anybody who's been watching this whole show, that guy to her right is. Briscoe Kane. This is a guy who, as the flooding was happening here in Texas and children were dying, he tweeted out, "We cannot allow this tragedy to be used as an excuse to grow government." So just remembering the kind of nice Christian values represented by this guy. But anyways, we'll play this clip a little bit and let y'all meet James Talarico.
Keep the Sabbath.
Part of keeping the Sabbath holy is not working on the Sabbath.
That is, yeah.
What day is the Jewish Sabbath?
It is on Saturday.
And what day is it today?
It is Saturday. Here we are.
The Christian Sabbath is what day?
Sunday, in honor of the day that Jesus rose from the dead.
And we're scheduled to give this bill a final vote on what day of the week?
It's ironic, isn't it?
Would you be willing to postpone your bill so that we're not breaking the 10 Commandments by working on the Jewish or Christian Sabbath?
I love that you said that, because
you're saying that you'd rather tell people to follow the 10 Commandments than follow it yourself?
I would have rather have had this bill passed the other day when it was time.
We as a legislature are about to force every teacher in the state to post the 10 Commandments in their classrooms.
If they are donated.
Do members of the Texas legislature follow the 10 Commandments?
So again, this bill is about honoring our historical, educational, and judicial heritage with the displaying of the 10 Commandments.
The 9th commandment is, "Thou shalt not bear false witness." Are you aware of any legislators who have lied about anything?
That is, there might be one coming up in a minute if you keep talking. We'll see.
The 7th commandment is, "Thou shalt not commit adultery."
Yes.
Do you think that members of the legislature should focus more on trying to follow the Ten Commandments rather than telling others to follow them?
I am, it is,
All right, and if you note there, somebody did say in the background, I don't know if anyone caught that, but somebody says, well, maybe it's because they didn't have them posted, which, yeah, I guess so. It's pretty good. Yeah, I mean, he's an interesting guy. You can see why, a lot of that stuff has gone as viral as it has, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is some nice, like, honestly, I actually find that kind of heartwarming. Like, this is like the culture war 30 years ago, right? This is like, this is some sort of good, like, vintage, like, kind of Molly Ivan style Texas progressivism right now.
So, we'll see. I've met him a couple of times. Nothing like serious, just more like in a room.
Sure.
He has these legislative sessions that we've had since he's been an elected rep have been some of the most horrendous, conservative, disgusting ones in the state's history. He does speak. To give him credit on his biblical stuff, like, he does sort of talk about like healthcare and poverty. He very famously recently said, like, it might be time to take Jesus's lead and start flipping over some tables. I like it. I think it's good rhetoric. I will say, just to be fair, I would like to see a little bit more. I'm going to be curious to see the substance, and I hope that the plan isn't to just kind of rely on rhetoric all the way through. Especially after a Colin Allred campaign, which was a disaster, because Colin Allred didn't stand for anything. And I'm not saying that to say that James Talarico doesn't. It's similar to Colin Allred or doesn't stand for anything, but he's gone very viral. He's made a name for himself on this kind of stuff. I want to see some of the material things because, this is somebody who is a Warren supporter, not a Bernie supporter, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah,
totally. Yeah. No, I mean, this is. I think this is very fun packaging, right? And it's just a. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a good instinct. Wait to see what it's packaging.
Wait to see what kind of race he's interested in running. If he runs for governor or if he runs for Senate, it's still an open question. He certainly is going to do something. I think there's no doubt about it right now. Folks, that's it for the main show, but the fun's not over. Ben just got here. We got a lot to get into. We're going to get into Zohran's win, this PBD clip, excuse me, and much, much more along with your questions. You get access to this at patreon.com/leftreckoning. Not only do you get the post game, you also get the Sunday show. So we're talking, 2-to-1 content over here. Y'all got to get over on that other side. Help me continue doing the show. Help Matt continue doing the show. There's a lot of fun stuff on the other bit. Ben, before we go over to the post game, is there anything on give them an argument that you'd like to plug?
Yeah, well, I had a great conversation last night with Sean Richman. Has he ever been on Left Reckoning?
No.
I'm not sure.
We should change that.
Okay, so yeah, no, you should. So he just wrote a cool book called "We Have Always Had a Union," about the New York Hotel Workers Union in the first, basically from just before World War I until the early 1950s, and it's it's like a crazy convoluted story. This is because this is New York, and so you have a lot of you have a lot of recent immigrants. It's kind of boiling point of a lot of different influences, at the time. So pretty much every major kind of left-wing radicalism, kind of has its turn at the head of this hotel workers union. You've got, Wobblies, Trotskyists, Stalinists, like everybody at one time or another. And it's just like above and beyond, the political lessons, which Sean is very good with. I mean, he has a background as a union organizer himself. And, his previous book, Tell the Bosses We're Coming, is about sort of, how we should think about what to do differently with, the labor movement going forward. But beyond that, I mean, it's just good. It's just good historical storytelling, kind of following all these clashing personalities.
Well, it's always a lot of fun listening to Give Them an Argument. Folks should be checking that out if they haven't already. we're going to jump right over. So, folks, I'm going to play music, but the show's not over. The link is up on patreon.com/leftreckoning for patrons. I already see a bunch of y'all are in there. Get your questions in early, too, if you want to have Ben and I answer any of those. But I'll play some music, and we'll hang out right here, and we'll be right over in the postgame in just a second.